Personality psychology. What do we know when we know a person? Arthur Fleck is a middle-aged man who lives with his mother, works as a professional clown in Gotham, attends state-funded therapy, and takes multiple medications to stop him from feeling bad. What does this tell us about Arthur's personality? Much, yet too little at the same time. Weisenberger's two myths about how personality psychology defines subject matter. First myth, that personality refers to some kind of underlying causal entity. We designate facts about a person through observation and not inference to an unobservable causal entity. Second, that the study of personality is the study of the whole person, when it only comprises a section of the whole set of characteristics of a person. These myths underlie the issue of the lack of definitive consensus among personality theorists on how to define personality. Despite their limitations, the grand theories of personality have enriched our understanding of personality and provide insights into its different facets: unconscious desires, cognitive processes, inherent traits, innate potentials, and learned behavior. We will explore Arthur's personality through some of the most influential personality theories of the 20th century: psychoanalysis, behaviorism, cognitive psychology, humanistic, and trait theory. A synthesis of these frameworks will allow us to better understand a complex character such as Arthur Fleck. All psychodynamic perspectives on personality agree on three core ideas: the primacy of the unconscious, the role of childhood experiences, and the notion that all human thoughts, motives, and emotions are all determined by unconscious processes. To better understand Arthur Fleck, I will discuss these core ideas using concepts from prominent psychodynamic theorists. Psychodynamic theorists concur that we process our memories, motives, and feelings outside of our conscious awareness. According to Freud, the id, the ego, and the superego are the psychological structures that form personality. The id operates on instant gratification. If not instantly met, the id forms a mental image to temporarily satisfy the urge known as wish fulfillment. We see many of Arthur's wish fulfillments for warmth and safety, one of which is when he hallucinates that his neighbor Sophie gave him a back rub at the hospital when his mother had a heart attack. The ego, on the other hand, regulates personality based on reality. Arthur, for example, had a job and cared for his mother. Finally, the superego is driven by the morals we have internalized from society and primary caregivers. This definition of the superego is appended in Arthur's case, where an uncaring society and parents resulted in a stunted superego. We see this reflected in the morals or lack thereof by our definition of the Joker. To keep the id under control, the ego executes unconscious psychological strategies known as defense mechanisms. Displacement is a defense mechanism whereby the mind displaces unacceptable thoughts from the original source to another. This may come in the form of jokes. For example, in his notebook of jokes, Arthur wrote, "I just hope my death makes more sense than my life." This joke was used to displace Arthur's undesirable thoughts of suicide. Displacement may also be of attribution, that is, an aspect of oneself is attributed to another person. Though through attribution, Arthur displaces his socially unacceptable behavior to the Joker. Regression is another defense mechanism where, in order to regain security and happiness, we regress to an earlier psychosexual stage of development where we feel happier. You see regression in Arthur's mannerisms, the way his speech is slow and sheepish, like a child. While these explain the role of the unconscious as the basis for psychoanalytic concepts, Freud has been criticized for the lack of anthropological, biological, and empirical evidence to prove these claims. Adler and Horney overlap with Freud on the importance of childhood experiences in shaping personality. Both, however, rejected Freud's focus on sex as the main driver of parent-child relationship and human behavior. Adler believed that as infants, we feel inferior. We learn to acknowledge our inferiority and become well-adjusted adults if we have a loving mother, a good role model for a father, and an equal relationship between parents. A mother who feels inferior will overcompensate by demanding her children to be more, to make up for what she feels is deficient in herself. This Haydn then means the inferiority is passed on to her child. Adopted by a woman who manipulates and puts him down to maintain control over him, and without a father figure to look up to, Arthur may be suffering from inferiority complex and overcompensates by becoming Joker, who justifies his murders as justice. The same example applies for Horney's notion of basic evil, which is a child's perception of a parent's action that leads to feeling unsafe. The child developed feelings of anger that cannot be expressed directly to the parents, thereby redirecting the violence towards others or to self-harm, which Horney called basic hostility. While the clear description of how childhood trauma could lead to psychological distress later in life is one of the strengths of psychodynamic theories, it is equally criticized for its inordinate focus on childhood or the past and its lack of regard for the present living and future strategies, interventions, and techniques. In agreement with Freud, Jung believed the psyche provides valuable insights into human emotions, motives, and behaviors. Jung believed that the unconscious mind is made up of the personal unconscious, the personal side of psychic life, and the collective unconscious, the cumulative memories that are shared among all human beings. Archetypes, according to Jung, apply to the collective unconscious as they are representations of psychic contents that have not undergone conscious elaboration and are therefore a representation of our collective psychic experience. We see primordial archetypes in Arthur's life, such as the terrible mother archetype in the form of Penny Fleck, the sociopathic trickster archetype in the form of the Joker, the persona archetype in the form of Arthur, the son, the clown, the employee, and so on. And finally, the shadow archetype, which is the darker side of the human being, embodies all suppressed characteristics. We see the shadow taking over when, after murdering three businessmen, Arthur remorselessly announces, "Comedy is subjective, isn't that what they say? All of you, the system, who knows so much, you decide what's right or wrong, same way you decide what's funny or not." This is the Joker, the personification of Arthur's shadow, announcing to the world that what's right or wrong is subjective and that his murders are justified, making him the hero, not the villain. Psychic causality helps explain the unconscious processes that determine human thoughts, motives, and emotions. Critics, particularly the behaviorists, however, argued against the psychodynamic theory's reliance on subjective interpretation of unobservable internal structures to explain behavior. In addition, the deterministic approach of psychodynamic theory suggests humans have no capacity for self-control and relies heavily on animalistic impulses. For example, it can be argued that Arthur exercised self-control when he killed Randall and spared Gary as his way of repaying for his kindness. Psychodynamic theories have contributed to our understanding of the hidden world inside us, although critics see this strength as its greatest weakness. This leads us to Jayden, who will talk about behaviorist theories to address concepts psychodynamic theories are lacking.
So the psychoanalytic approach has begun to tease out some of what we know about Arthur Fleck. Unfortunately, inner states, particularly the subconscious, are difficult to measure and evaluate. An analysis of the character's environment, behaviors, and their consequences through the lens of behaviorism may build upon our understanding of knowing Arthur Fleck more comprehensively. Skinner and other behaviorists of the time asserted that stable behavior patterns, and therefore what we might consider one's personality, were molded by our experiences in how we might move towards pleasure-inducing stimuli or away from unpleasant stimuli. The operant, a behavior that generates a consequence, will shape one's tendency to respond to different stimuli in stable ways over time, which Skinner termed response tendencies. While he strongly dismissed observation of inner states as unscientific, Dollard and Miller attempted to extend the theory of operant conditioning to explain the role of the subconscious in behavior and personality, formulating the stimulus response model. So again, Skinner believed that one's behavioral tendencies are shaped through experiences in the environment that increased or decreased certain behaviors, and he termed this reinforcement and punishment. Positive reinforcement involves the addition of a positive or pleasurable stimulus following a behavior that will then strengthen it in the future. We can apply this in analyzing aspects of Arthur Fleck's personality to illustrate the ways in which behaviors can elicit positive consequences that go on to shape consistent behavioral patterns. So, for example, Arthur murders 3 businessmen whilst returning home on the subway. Large groups then celebrate this, viewing it as a just attack on the wealthy. We could infer from the mob donning clown masks in his image and the delighted look that he has there on his face that Arthur interprets this as praise and approval. From this point, we see him commit violent acts with greater frequency and less discretion, perhaps continuing to chase the approval of his newfound clown peers. This change of behavior also highlights the behaviorist concept of learning through shaping, where reinforcement incrementally guides someone towards a certain behavior. Accordingly, Arthur's brutality increases over time, suggesting his strengthening association between approval from others and behaving violently. Unfortunately, we can't go much further than what is tangible, and the thought or reasoning behind these decisions cannot be analysed through the operant lens. Negative reinforcement, on the other hand, is the avoidance of an unpleasant stimulus that will lead to an increase of the behaviour employed to avoid it. A study conducted by Leibowitz highlighted the way negative reinforcement can shape one's behaviour to become socially anxious, as we see with Arthur. When an individual avoids social interactions, they might feel a relief in anxiety. So when Arthur interacts with a child on the bus, this leads him to being scolded by his mother, the stimulus. Arthur looks surprised, likely feeling embarrassed, triggering his laughing tic, the response, which causes him to withdraw from the interaction to relieve his anxiety, and this would likely reinforce that behaviour. Where social withdrawal allows escape from the negative stimuli, we can see the ways in which negative reinforcement can shape the types of shy and avoidant behaviours we see in Arthur Fleck's personality. However, Arthur is not shy in all scenarios, as we see in his comedy routines. This suggests that his social withdrawal is not consistent with the environmentally deterministic view of behaviorism. The cause of this contradiction may lie in how Arthur interprets environmental stimuli, which of course, again, falls outside the scope of behaviorism. So punishment is the opposite of reinforcement in that it will weaken or eliminate a behavior. Positive punishment is the addition of an unpleasant stimulus, whereas negative punishment is the removal of a pleasant stimulus. Researchers have found that positive punishment, such as hitting or smacking children, is associated with increased mental health problems and aggressive and violent behaviour. So we know that Arthur was badly beaten by his stepfather as a child, so perhaps this might explain his tendency towards violence. So I've tried to apply traditional behaviourist frameworks to rather complex human behaviours, and I've highlighted its limitations in cohesively analysing Arthur's personality. Dollard and Miller noticed this too. So they considered primary drives, such as the avoidance of pain, sleep, hunger, and thirst, most strongly, they believed it most strongly influenced reinforcement, and that there are therefore automatic and subconscious. And then additionally, secondary drives such as money or social acceptance are developed to meet their associated primary drives. They propose that to learn, one must want something, notice something, do something, and get something, terming these factors as drive, cue, response, and reward, respectively. The stimulus response model could address the limitation I pointed out previously. Arthur withdraws in the bus scenario because in that instance, he needed to satiate the primary drive of feeling safe. While at work as a clown, he's socially gregarious. But this is his job, and he's working to obtain the secondary drive of money, which would allow him to address his primary drive of hunger. So Dollard and Miller were also interested in the various situations that we navigate to address primary or secondary drives. I've listed all 4 here on the slides, but I'd like to focus on the approach avoidance conflict, where we see Arthur attempting to address both his need to feel safe and keep his job. So he's given a gun from a co-worker after he's mugged, In this instance, he's both reluctant because it's illegal to have a firearm and relieved because he needs to feel safe while he's out in public as well. So operant conditioning provides a framework where Arthur's personality is revealed through his behaviours and how his environment might shape these tendencies. Neither theory is equipped to consider higher order thinking. Accordingly, this framework can only go so far in explaining the complex behaviours we see in Arthur Fleck. Therefore, to build upon this understanding, the role of cognition in influencing behaviour would allow for a deeper knowing of Arthur and will be explored in the next slides by Xubei.
So in order to get a fuller picture of Arthur and the higher order thinking about how to know a person, then we will now look at how internal factors shape a person's behavior and personality. We will learn this with the help of the cognitive theories. So in contrast to the psychodynamic theories and the behavior theories we just discussed, the cognitive theory is concerned with the perception of our internal factors. It looks at how we store, retrieve, and process the information, and how this information affects our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and then how this shapes our personality. So today we will introduce two important theories which are proposed by George Kelly and Albert Ellis to understand how to learn a person from a cognition perspective. Then we come to the first theory, the personal construct theory. Here, Kelly suggests that we should be like scientists, having our own theories and hypotheses about everything we encounter in life. We use our behaviors to test our hypotheses, theories, and assumptions, and weigh the results to adjust our hypotheses. So if our evidence is good enough, then we come to the next stage, which we strengthen our beliefs. But if it is not, then we go back to the first stage, we adjust our hypotheses and theories and use our behavior to test it again till it works. So in these whole processes, by developing these tons of construct, we develop our own perception of the world. Therefore, a construct is like a concept. It is because we add our own views on it, it becomes a personal construct, representing our worldview. So using Arthur Fleck's example to explain it. So when we are beaten up, our construct from experience may tell us that we should fight or flight. But Arthur's previous experience of being hit has allowed him to construct his belief that he should be endured. It is because of the information you should endure being hit was already encoded in his cognition, and the belief was further validated as the evidence. So Arthur's personal construct was already developed and strengthened. Therefore, when he was beaten, he chose to endure it, which led to develop of his fragile, chaotic, and desperate personality. Also, in Kelly's theory, he proposed 11 corollaries. I will just go through one of the corollaries, the dichotomy corollary here. It means our personal constructs are bipolar. Again, to give an example from Arthur, he was told by his mom that he should be a person who made people happy. So in his dream career construct, he only has two choices. One is becoming a stand-up comedian, and the second is not being a stand-up comedian. So there's no other choices. And finally, how can we apply this theory to practical treatment? Kelly also developed the representation grid test to help therapists in their clinical work. Then we come to the second theory, the rational emotive behavior therapy. We also call it REBT, which is proposed by Albert Ellis. So Ellis stated that as humans, we have the capacity for both healthy and unhealthy cognitive processes, which he labeled rational and irrational thinking. So rational thinking must account for our subjective experience reflected in our personal goals. For example, Arthur Fleck suffers from the neurological disorder that causes him have a random, uncontrollable laughing fits. But his dream is to become a stand-up comedian. So that's not a rational goal or rational thinking. Also, we're going to discuss the central tenet in REBT, which is the free will, or let's say our freedom to make choices. We all have the free will in selecting our goals, but once we have selected a goal, it may determine our subsequent behavior. Thus, the contradiction that arises here and the role of control leads to the development of the ABC model. Say also flags first shooting scenario. So A refers to the activating event, such as one author is mocked and beaten by the drunk businessman. And B refers to the beliefs about A, such as author believes that he is the one who is oppressed and does not feel any warmth from the society. And C is the emotional and behavioral consequence of our beliefs, such as author feel that he's very desperate and decides to shoot them. So most individual will believe that A causes C, that being beaten causes shooting event. But however, Alice says that it is actually B that causes C. It is how we think about the situation that causes the emotional and behavioral consequences. Also, in therapy, the model extends to D and E. D for distributing of our irrational beliefs, and E for the effects, thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that are more rational. All right, so the above is a rough summary of these two theories, and we then conclude with a quick summary of the strengths and weakness of the whole cognitive theory. So in principle, we should adopt like 8 criteria, which is here, to evaluate the theory. But due to the time limitation, I've summarized a couple key points. So the strengths of the cognitive theories are, first, both theories are very easy to test. It is relatively easy to derive hypotheses for testing based on the theories, and this has been done. The RAP grid also provides a precise, valid way of measuring personal constructs. And second, cognitive theory focuses more on the uniqueness of the individuals and describe clear systems for understanding and exploring the way that an individual's cognition are structured. But also the biggest problem is that cognitive theory employs few concepts and focus too much on the individual's thought processes, ignoring any other external factors. So therefore, we introduce Joanna to explain the next theory to try to address this problem.
So I'll be talking about humanistic theories, focusing on theorist Carl Rogers. Humanistic theories, known as the third force, were a response to the perceived limitations of both psychodynamic and behavioural theories. Theorists Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow challenged the idea that our behaviour is determined primarily by our unconscious drives or by our environment. Like Ellis, they believed in free will, that people can largely self-determine their behaviour. Unlike cognitivists, humanists believe that to understand a person, you need to look at the holistic subjective experience of a person rather than just on their cognition. So Rogers' theory is centered around 4 key concepts, which I'll now explore in relation to Arthur. Rogers believed that we're all motivated by one innate drive towards positive growth, a process he called self-actualization. He rejected Freud's belief that humans are inherently flawed, instead believing that humans behave badly when they've had negative experiences that block their actualizing tendency. In Arthur, we can initially see his actualizing tendency. He's trying to work as a clown, taking his medication and going to counselling, aspiring to be a comedian. From Rogers' perspective, Arthur becomes the villainous joker, not because he's rotten or bad, but because his childhood abuse and problematic relationship with his adoptive mother Penny has blocked his drive towards self-actualization. So Rogers drew a distinction between our real organismic self and our self-concept. Our real self is the person we're capable of becoming if we're raised in ideal circumstances, and it's influenced by our genetic makeup. Our self-concept is the person we know ourselves to be and is mostly shaped by childhood experiences and how we think other people see us. It comprises 3 elements: our self-worth, which is the set of consistent beliefs and perceptions we hold about ourselves, our self-image, which is how we see ourselves, and our ideal self, which is who we would like to be. According to Rogers, our self-worth is influenced by the extent to which we received as children unconditional positive regard or not from our parents. This is when love and respect is given without conditions, when someone is valued simply for existing. And according to Rogers, this is the ideal situation for children. When positive regard is conditional, we internalize conditions of worth and end up behaving in ways we think others expect of us based on what we believe they value in us. So Penny's love of Arthur was conditional on him appearing happy, even in the face of extreme abuse and neglect. She gave him the nickname Happy, and as Arthur said during one of his delusions, she always tells me to smile and put on a happy face. According to Rogers, people who have developed more extreme conditions of worth, like Arthur, perceive a wide gap between their self-image and their ideal self, referred to as an incongruence. They make choices to suit others and become increasingly alienated from their real selves. And they're unable to self-actualize, which can lead to depression, anxiety, stress, and in extreme cases, harmful or antisocial behavior. In contrast, congruence allows us to self-actualize and achieve our full potential. We feel more connected socially and feel more meaning and satisfaction with life. Thinking about Arthur, he initially puts on a happy face for the world, hoping to be valued and loved, but instead experiences increasing rejection and abuse. He's depressed and distressed. We can see his extreme incongruence through his delusions of a relationship with his neighbour and appearing on TV. When Arthur discovers the truth about his childhood, his self-image, ideal self, his whole self-concept is destroyed. He kills Penny, yelling, "Happy? I'm not happy. I haven't been happy for 1 minute of my entire life." From Roger's perspective, it appears here that his original self-concept has been replaced by the murderous Joker. Roger's humanistic theory is an important contribution to personality psychology as it helps us understand how people see themselves. His distinction between self-image and the ideal self and his concept of conditions of worth are useful for recognizing how individuals evaluate themselves. Empirical studies are generally positive about Roger's theory. However, it's important to note that these rely heavily on self-report measures. Nonetheless, this theory is widely accepted and it's foundational learning in most counselling courses today. There are significant limitations, however. Firstly, it's based on an overly optimistic assessment of human nature. When considering Arthur's transformation into the Joker, the theory doesn't explain why Arthur's incongruence would lead him to become a murderous villain, when this would not be the case for many others. Secondly, Roger's theory is too limited in its focus. By excluding the unconscious, the theory fails to examine the influence of, for example, defense mechanisms or innate drives other than our actualizing tendency. It also overlooks other influences, such as biological factors. Rogers also uses a small number of concepts and applies them too broadly. For example, he held that psychopathology arises when our actualizing tendency is blocked. This is clearly an overly simplistic explanation. Finally, as noted earlier, testing the theory relies heavily on self-report and observation rather than objective measures, so its empirical validity is reduced. In summary, by applying this theory to Arthur, we can better understand who he is as a person through his self-concept, and we can recognise the incongruence he experienced between his self-image and his ideal self. However, the theory offers an overly simplistic and unsatisfactory explanation of his transformation into the murderous villain, and it excludes significant influences from the analysis of his personality. It also is limited in its empirical validity. So Roger's theory is insufficient for fully understanding Arthur's deeply complex personality. I'll now hand over to Anthony.
Thanks, Joanna. Whilst the humanistic approach attempts to consider the whole person in understanding Arthur Fleck's personality, it lacks empirical evidence. In contrast, trait theory introduces a measurable dimension to personality analysis, allowing for a structured method to delineate and assess various facets of an individual's personality. Through the lens of Isaac's Penn model and Costin McRae's five-factor model, aka the Big Five, we will explore Arthur Fleck's character in detail, highlighting the strengths and potential shortcomings of trait theory and helping us determine what we know when we know a person. So both models utilize a hierarchical approach to organize personality traits, which are constructed by specific responses to situations, to then becoming habitual, which then relate to broader traits, and finally super traits informed by it all at the top. To develop these models, researchers use a method called factor analysis. The method involves collecting a large amount of data on how people behave, feel, and think, and then using statistical techniques to find and group together related personality traits. This approach helps us in identifying the core traits that shape our personality. So the PEN model outlines 3 core super traits: neuroticism, extroversion, and psychoticism. The Big Five parallels and extends this model, incorporating the super trait of openness. According to Goldberg's research, the trait of agreeableness and conscientiousness are incorporated within the psychoticism super trait, and therefore for simplicity will be used as an overarching super trait. These traits exist along a continuum. For instance, neuroticism, where individuals might encounter difficulties regulating emotions, oscillating between considerable emotional stability to profound instability. Each individual invariably resides somewhere along the spectrum, showcasing the diversity and depth of human personality. So analysing Arthur Fleck, we note his specific response, which is uncontrollable laughter, manifesting habitually in inappropriate situations, evidenced in encounters like those with the mother on the bus, the 3 men on the subway, and during his regular meetings with the social worker. This suggests that Arthur grapples with significant anxiety and emotional instability, defining traits of his personality. This is corroborated through his reliance on prescription medication to not feel so bad anymore, indicating Arthur would likely register a high score on the neuroticism trait. Individuals who register high scores in extroversion generally exhibit sociable, outgoing tendencies and foster positive interactions with others. Arthur manifests as reserved and shy, a distinctive response that habitually surfaces in his interactions with others. For example, in his engagement with his neighbour Sophie, his reserved stance with work colleagues, and his palpable fear and shyness on stage. Given his tendency to avoid social interactions and his reserved and reflective nature, Arthur leans towards an introverted personality. Moving on to psychoticism, a trait marked by insensitivity, hostility, and a lack of empathy. Arthur can be observed showcasing violent and aggressive tendencies, a specific response that often manifests as abrupt outbursts in moments of peril or anger. A habitual reaction illustrated in scenarios with killing the 3 men on the train, in the images there, aggressively punching the clock, and his vengeful act against Murray on the talk show. These episodes paint Arthur as impulsive, aggressive, devoid of empathy, and egocentric, likely scoring high levels of psychoticism. Lastly, the Big Five's unique trait, openness to experience, entails a fondness for arts, creativity, and a vibrant imagination. Arthur exemplifies this through his habitual expressive dances during moments of joy and aggression, illustrating his artistic tendencies and imaginative embrace of his Joker persona. This suggests that Arthur ranks high in the openness dimension. Now, Isaac suggests that biological factors account for 2/3 of personality development variance, setting limits on individuals' ability for personality to change. Neuroticism is connected to the sympathetic nervous system, specifically the reticulolimbic circuit, which regulates the fight or flight response. Those with elevated neuroticism experience intensified activation and increased thresholds in the visceral brain, heightening their sensitivity to minor stresses. Arousal theory explains the spectrum of extroversion to introversion through the lens of cortical arousal, managed by the brain's ascending reticular activation system. Introverts experience greater brain activity levels, amplifying their responsiveness to stimulation, while extroverts present lower levels, compelling them to pursue additional stimulation. Psychoticism, lastly, aligns with fluctuations in testosterone and MAO enzyme levels. Typically, individuals with elevated testosterone and diminished MAO levels exhibit psychotic traits, since lower MAO levels hinder the efficient metabolization of crucial neurotransmitters, such as dopamine and serotonin. This disruption fosters impulsivity and aggression, heightening the likelihood of experiencing psychotic episodes. However, as So suggests, research on psychoticism is still in its infancy. Although it's impossible to know what's going on biologically for Arthur, Isaac's explanation adds another piece to the complex puzzle of personality. Now, starting off with strengths. Firstly, trait theory is grounded in scientific research and empirical data, and also appears to be stable across cultures, genders, and children. However, what it lacks by attempting to describe personality through a finite set of traits is overlook the complexity and depth of individual personality, which can encompass a wide array of nuanced behaviors and experiences. It also doesn't take into consideration the significant influence of situational factors on behavior. This theory neglects the role context plays in shaping behavior and ultimately personality. Lastly, trait theory tends to view personality as relatively stable and changing over time, failing to account for the dynamic and evolving nature of human personality. As can be seen in Arthur Fleck, who undergoes a considerable shift in his personality from a man with glimpses of hope, a desire to make others happy, and a quiet disposition into someone who is violent and egocentric. Thank you. In conclusion, these theories have enriched our understanding of human personality and highlighted each of their unique strengths and limitations. An integrative analysis helps bridge gaps in these theories, enhancing our understanding of complex characters like Arthur Fleck. The psychodynamic approach, anchored in the unconscious mind, implies understanding someone requires uncovering their core fears, desires, and formative experiences. The joke embodies Arthur Fleck's internal conflict and the manifestation of his childhood trauma, serving as an outlet for his socially unacceptable behaviours and deep-seated feelings of inferiority. However, this relies on the interpretation of unobservable internal structures, providing a potentially unrealistic analysis. In contrast, behaviours theories imply that personality evolves through environmental interactions, with behaviours being conditioned over time. For instance, Arthur's transformation into the violent Joker is explained through positive reinforcement, where his violent misdeeds become associated with acceptance and approval. Unfortunately, this theory cannot consider any of the thought or reasoning that may influence the decisions he makes in response to a stimulus. The cognitive perspective addresses this by focusing on the conscious mind, emphasizing the role of thought patterns and mental schematics in shaping personality. Knowing someone here involves understanding their cognitive constructs and worldview. Arthur Fleck's difficult upbringing cultivated a negative outlook, fostering hopelessness and despair, which significantly influenced his behavior. As with psychoanalysis and behaviorism, this theory focuses on one concept. The humanistic perspective emphasizes a holistic approach where we can consider personality beyond behavior and cognition, often being referred to as the third force. Arthur Fleck is not inherently a bad person, but rather his drive towards self-actualization is blocked due to alienation from his real self. This theory addresses the limitations of determinism underpinning psychoanalytic and behaviorist theories by asserting that, under the right circumstances, all individuals are capable of positive growth. However, it falls short in providing a comprehensive and measurable assessment of personality. Finally, trait theory provides a structured and measurable approach to understanding personality. Through this perspective, knowing someone means identifying their dominant traits that guide their behaviors in different situations. Eisner explores aspects of a physiological explanation to personality. However, the previously mentioned theorists neglect this vital biological perspective. Arthur is depicted as a highly neurotic, introverted, and psychotic individual who embraces his creative expression. However, he evolves into a more extroverted, less neurotic Joker, thereby contesting the theory's claim of consistent trait stability over time. As Bergner identified, we see that the psychology of personality is fragmented and will benefit from a comprehensive perspective that simplifies what we know when we know a person. Integrating these perspectives reveals that truly understanding a person is a complex endeavor, necessitating a deep analysis that synthesizes insights from each theory, encompassing unconscious desires, cognitive processes, inherent traits, innate potentials, and learned behaviors. Thank you.